And for horse team, you can't keep the world from moving.
I took it off.
Okay, awesome.
No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. Gaining ground, yeah. You can't keep the world from moving round. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. Gaining ground. You might be reader and writer too, and wiser than old Solomon the Jew. But you can't keep the world from moving round. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. You can't keep the world from moving round. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. And your name in Marque sees ashore, and got to can shoot a model more. Lord, you can't keep the world from moving around. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. You can't keep the world from moving around. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. You might be a carol from Carrollton, a rising idol for your late creation. Oh, you can't keep the world from moving around. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. Oh, you can't keep the world from moving around. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground. You can't keep the world from moving around. No, Nat Turner from gaining ground.
Epa detention, katibu nanga disi kutare kosa termina, katibu nanga disi kutare libertad pasar. Doce ngai pasa, ora bella zona, epa detention, katibu na reuni, yuzu nanga disi kutare mesti.
Okay, welcome everyone to class number 4 of our Movement to End Slavery course from spring 23 for the University of the Poor. Really glad you're with us as we close out the first third of our course this evening. And it's really a jam-packed class tonight. We've got a lot of good stuff that we're going to be doing together. Really excited about this. So I'm going to go over the plan for this evening, but before I do that, just real briefly, I just want to remind us that this is not an academic course and none of us are getting grades for this course, right? That's not what we're doing here. We've said that before, that we're leaders in a movement to end poverty and systemic racism and ecological destruction and a war economy and Christian nationalism, and that we're fighting on different fronts of struggle and in different regions of this country. And we, like the leaders of previous movements that have come before us, are studying history of the people who came before us to gain inspiration, as well as to look for lessons that will inform our work today, to give us more perspective for the work that we're doing today. And we hope that many of you have gotten a chance to meet outside of class in a first discussion group that will have met outside of class to get to know each other, to get to know each other's work, and to find out where each of us are on in our journey to becoming the kind of leaders and generals that our class needs in this movement that we're building. So this evening, we're going to have our usual Mystica, which Sierra will lead us on in shortly. Then we're going to go to breakout pairs tonight for 5 minutes, just in pairs, or maybe 3 ways for people that are in the same room online with someone else. And then we're going to dig into the presentation this evening. And as you all know, last week we asked for volunteers to lead us in learning about different uprisings and rebellions. And so we've got a really amazing group of folks who stepped up are going to co-construct this course with us by presenting this evening. So really excited about that. We'll have different rounds of presentation followed by discussion, and then another round of presentations followed by discussion, a wrap up of the presentation, and then we'll have time for discussion groups at the end of the class tonight. And as we've done in previous weeks, just a heads up on what's coming next week. So that's the plan for this evening, truly a lot. And we appreciate you all being with us and encourage folks to use the chat as we do here, just to continue to learn and support the learning process, and really to appreciate folks who are going to be presenting this evening. We'll say more on that in a little bit. So I'm going to hand it over to Sierra. Thank you, to take us into the Mystica.
Thank you so much, Phil. I am also excited for tonight. Again, my name is Sierra. I'm based here in Harlem. I'm with the Cairo Center and, of course, the University of the Poor. I have 2 folks signed up to read. I can read the 3rd slide. Thank you, Rin and Brother Nile. I'll let you know when to go for it. We wanted to open up this session today on rebellions and uprisings in a way that we felt was pretty effective in our 2020 course that we held. And it was just so happened that this session that we used to talk about uprisings and rebellions and the movement to end slavery coincided with the rise of uprisings following the murder of George Floyd. And so we thought that it would make sense in that period to talk about this concept and analysis around how we understand uprisings and rebellions and how we see through to what is really going on in these moments where there can be so much confusion, by delving into another part of history. We were able to bring in our OG Willie, who many of you all know was politicized in the Watts Rebellion. And we took a look back at 1965 Watts Uprising, which looms large in the historical development of our network. And so we wanted to play this little clip. This comes from some scenes from the Watts Uprising, its impact, not just materially, but also on the consciousness of leaders, and in this case specifically of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
6 days of rioting in a Negro section of Los Angeles left behind scenes reminiscent of war-torn cities. More than 100 square blocks were decimated by fire and looters, and few buildings were left intact. Firemen were harassed by snipers and brick-throwing hoodlums as they attempted to control the fires, many of which were left to burn themselves out. As the National Guard moved in to restore comparative calm, the losses by fire alone were put at $200 million. No attempt has yet been made to estimate the losses suffered at the hands of the looters who stole everything from liquor to playpens. 14,000 troops to bring an end to what both Negro and white leaders called insurrection by hoodlums. Civil rights leaders were quick to deplore the unbridled lawlessness, and Martin Luther King vowed to do all in his power to prevent a recurrence in Los Angeles or anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I have come to Los Angeles at the invitation of a number of concerned individuals and major organizations that have been, like myself, deeply involved in the struggle for civil rights and human dignity. Let me say first of all that I profoundly deplore the events that have occurred in Los Angeles in these last few tragic days. The criminal responses which led to the tragic outbreaks of violence in Los Angeles are environmental and not racial. The economic deprivation, social isolation, inadequate housing, and general despair of thousands of Negroes teeming in northern and western ghettos are the ready seeds which give birth to tragic expressions of violence. By acts of commission and omission, none of us in this great country has done enough to remove injustice. I therefore humbly suggest that all of us accept our share of responsibility for these past days of anguish.
Speak. Civil Rights, King, Van Oker, roll 20, sound 36.
These young people are saying that there must be a revolution of values in our country. As Jimmy Baldwin said on one occasion, what advantage is there in being integrated into a burning house? And I feel that there is a need for a revolution of values in America, because some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideals and many of the values. Now, I'm not...
Thank you so much, John. So just as the Watts Uprising taught Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that the civil rights movement had not met the needs of the poorest, that the movement needed to pivot from a civil rights strategy to a human rights strategy, to unite the bottom and bring about new forms of struggle and organization that would be required to build the movement truly that is needed to completely turn this system around. The uprisings that we're studying in this class also inspired and informed those that would be the leading abolitionists of the lessons from the movement to end slavery. Without going on too long, but we wanted to read a few slides that helps contextualize the impact that the Watts Uprising had on these leaders of the 60s and later, and why they moved to a human rights framework, and how they also studied this movement to end slavery and the rise of the abolitionist struggle as a means to understand their context of their day and where we needed to go forward in order to build a movement to abolish poverty. And so we'll have Rin start off by reading the first slide.
Watts was the opening battle of a war that was to rage for 3 years. It was the greatest civil disturbance since the Civil War. It was not a struggle for civil rights. It was an uprising against a brutal and alien state power. It was to the coming struggle what Lyon of 1836 was to the Paris Commune, or what the Commune was to the Soviet Revolution. Historically, it was not a Black rebellion. It was the first uprising of the most exploited and oppressed section of the proletariat.
Brother Manal, you can just jump in.
The future was birthed there. Like all futures, Watts, the thunder and lightning of the coming storm, was shot and stomped upon until dying but not dead. It crawled back into the warmth and protection of the earth. There its wounds were bathed by those thought dead at Haymarket and Harper's Ferry. There Nat Turner, his bones all broken from the slaver's rack and surrounded by all the thunder and lightning of his time, cradled Watts and said again, it was not in vain. Did they not crucify Jesus?
And finally, Julia.
Our class enemy has never learned So when the hanging's done and the embers of the burning stake are gray and cold, the conquered bodies of martyrs become the unconquerable ideas. So it is with Watts. Held back by a mountain of bribe money and drugs and the terror of the fascist police, the spirit of Watts remains alive, the uprising that points the way to revolution. A remembrance 23 years after Watts, Nelson Theory, 1988.
Thank you, Julia. Our class enemy has never learned, but when the hanging's done and the embers at the burning stake are grayed and cold, the conquered bodies of martyrs have become the unconquerable ideas. So it is with Watts, held back by a mountain of bribe, money, and drugs, of the terror of the fascist police. The spirit of Watts remains alive, the uprising that points its way to revolution. And we'll get into this sort of analysis and how revolutionaries throughout time have been able to form analysis and understand their context of their struggle by going back to the past with this class today. So thank you all.
Cool. So I'm going to send us off into our breakout rooms. These are just pairs for the most part, some threes, just 5 minutes tonight. So make sure everybody has a chance to get in there. Questions have been posted to the chat. We'll see you all back here in around 5 minutes. Thanks.
Right.
Okay.
It was beautiful.
Oh, let's pause the recording
Oh,
here.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back from your breakouts. We know that wasn't enough time, but hopefully you had a little bit of a chance to converse with each other. I'm just gonna grab the baton from last week and bring it into this week, okay, for a few minutes here, just to remind us where we were. So last week we looked at the period of the 1600s Virginia colony, where when the bottom rebelled, they did so together. Do y'all remember that? Together. After Bacon's rebellion, the ruling class of the day decided upon what Lerone Bennett called the 100 Years of Brutally Violent Mass Conditioning Campaign, where one section of the poor was whipped and the other section was given the whip, but also whipped as well when they refused to see their interest with the interest of the planter class. As a result of this, in the years that followed the decades and century that followed, when the poor rose up, they increasingly did so alone and not together. While enslaved Black people, when they rebelled, did get assistance from poor whites, who also had beefs with the planter class, there were, for the most part, siloed uprisings of enslaved Black people and not uprisings of a united poor and working class, with the partial exception of the Seminole Wars, which we'll hear a little bit about tonight. If we look at the 1790s, for example, there's the Haitian Revolution, which we'll hear about shortly, and many other uprisings of enslaved Black people throughout the South. But there are the Ohio Indian Wars and the Whiskey Rebellion of poor white farmers in Western Pennsylvania. In fact, it was the fighting in Ohio and Western Pennsylvania that created maneuvering space for uprisings throughout the South as militia were pulled away in the 1790s to put down the Ohio Indian Wars and the Whiskey Rebellion of poor white farmers in Pennsylvania. Ultimately, there was no significant coordination amongst these different social forces that went into motion, and a ruling class was able to pick them off one by one. In 1857, Douglas spoke of a time of increasing physical resistance to the Fugitive Slave Act and criticism of that physical resistance in certain sections within and beyond the abolitionist movement. He also reflected back on earlier stages of the abolitionist movement in the US and internationally to other uprisings throughout the hemisphere. The most famous lines from his "If there is no struggle, there's no progress" speech are most likely these, and I'll post them in the chat. In these lines, Douglas says, those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Douglas here notes the combo of forms of struggle, physical and moral, suggesting without the physical rebellion of the strictly moral arguments would not have succeeded in the ending of slavery in the British West Indies. We're going to look at these combinations of forms of struggle throughout the movement, throughout the course: running and writing abolition, legal and illegal forms of activity, electoral and non-electoral forms of activity, the combination of forms of struggle. But I want to say perhaps the most significant line for us tonight is when Douglas quotes the poet Byron, saying, "Who would be free themselves must strike the blow." Douglas is teaching us that the revolutionary social force has to go into motion for its own emancipation if others are to support it and join it. And when I heard that line, I thought of King's 1968 speech, where he spoke about the millions of poor people in this country who have very little or even nothing to lose. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life. I think we've all heard this before. In the decades we're studying tonight, in what we call the uprisings and rebellion stage of the movement to end slavery, the new and unsettling force acting fell on deaf ears when it came to the masses of other social forces in the rest of the country who were not prepared to unite with that unsettling force in the times in which it was happening in this stage. But the new and unsettling force did win the advanced sections of social forces that were scattered across the country. And those advanced forces would help to forge a successful revolutionary movement led by that revolutionary force. I need to wrap up, so I'm just going to say there are many forms of resistance that happened throughout this period, and any time under oppression and slavery. In this period specifically, there was withholding labor, breaking instruments, poisoning the master, and flight. Flight wasn't just above the Mason-Dixon line, as we learned, but to Florida, to the West, to Maroon communities. And we want to say that in this course, we're mainly looking at slavery and the resistance to slavery to Mexico. Thank you, John. In the US context, but we really do need to commit to further study to the hemisphere as a whole to learn the lessons across these different struggles. So we're about to pivot into the presentations that our co-constructors of this course have graciously volunteered to do with us tonight. And we're asking for everyone to give them a lot of grace as they present. I think we're in for a treat with these presentations. The presenters will do them in blocks of 2. So we're going to hear from Dee and then Mads, Dee on the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, and then Mads and Reverend Neil on the German coast, 1811 rebellion. We'll have some discussion. And then in a second block, we'll hear from Moses and Anu on the Seminole Wars, 1816 to 1858, and Oshara on Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. And we'll have discussion. And Karen will close us out with the presentation, and we'll go to our discussion group. So that's a lot to pull off in the next chunk of time. And just a reminder, feel free to use the chat, but we want to try to figure out the balance to not distract from the presentation, but to support the presentation. So keep that in mind. I think without any further ado, Dee, we're going to turn it over to you, and John's going to pull up the PowerPoint.
Good evening. I don't know if I'm going to share my screen or not. Can you see me? Let me see. So while we're looking at the slideshow, we can't see me, right?
No, we can see you.
Oh, cool. I've got gloves. These are Haiti boxing gloves. On my newest website, Fight Hate with Gloves, I have little miniature boxing gloves from like every different country flag, every different nation. And if you look at this picture that says Haitian Revolution, you see the H is a cannon, which is on Haitian seal. That cannon on its wheel has mud and blood. This cross has blood dripping from it. In between the T and the H are an A and an I. The A is sugarcane. The A is the foundation. A is the alpha. It's the beginning. The sugarcane. It was bloody. It was a crop that cut people. It was a crop that was hard to harvest. People were injured in the heat. They were hurt by this crop that had these long stalks. If you look at the cannon looks like it could have been made out of sugarcane. Sugarcane's tall. There's machines that are used to harvest this crop now, but people were enslaved and forced to work and were even shot, killed if they weren't working fast enough or hard enough. The I in front of the cross, in front of the T, which represents truth. The I is individuals, people. There's women. This woman in the back is holding on to a Polish flag. Now, there were Polish people that came to fight alongside the French to stop this rebellion of these enslaved people and free Creole people, Black people, brown people, people that were mixed, people that were white and indentured. These folks that came together as individuals and groups were able to fight back. You know, they did their due diligence, they did their job. On the other side of the T, you see the leader, Haitian revolutionary, Toussaint Louverture. We're gonna switch to the next slide pretty soon, but Toussaint Louverture is holding on to the Eiffel Tower, and I'm gonna get to that in a minute, but let's go to the next slide really quick while I've got time. Oh, and revolution, if you look at the roots there, the roots look kind of like books, right? So the roots, if you look close at them, they are the beginning of revolution. They're the beginning of something changing. Toussaint Louverture was highly educated. He was taught as a young man, a young enslaved man, a child really, how to read. But let's go to that next slide. We can see the roots still on that next one. But Hispaniola, which we know is Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Oh, I've got to turn this other meeting off if I could. Sorry about that. But if you guys can read that slide really quick, that'd be awesome. I gotta leave this thing. So
Hispaniola was discovered by Spain in 1492 Saint-Domingue, Haiti, under French rule, colonization until 1804. Sugarcane was the chief export. This produce is farmed by machine now, but in 1700 and 1800, the work was done by enslaved people whose crop was stolen from them. Residents were taxed without benefits enjoyed by French citizens.
thanks, Sierra. Next slide, please. We're not going to read all this, but I talked a lot about the division. I talked a lot about the different nationalities that came together to fight back against France. And here is where I shared a little bit more about that. Let's go to the next slide, but you see the T, that's the truth. You know, that's the cross. That here we've got the truth about this whole situation. Those colonizers that stole, I'm here at the Eiffel Tower now, they took from Haiti again by charging Haiti a ransom. They threatened the people of Haiti, France did, and took so much money from these poor people and built these towers, these buildings, that the Eiffel Tower has been painted. I put this down here. The Eiffel Tower has been painted with 60 tons of paint every, I think, 7 years or something like that. 7 years, because it's a huge tower, but that takes a lot of money. And when I think about Wilmington, where I'm from, I think about the DuPonts, and I think about the fact that they came from France, and I think about the fact that they came at the same time as Saint-Domingue, or at the same time as Haiti becoming Haiti. And with that, I think I've used my 5 minutes, but next slide, please. Where am I on time?
We'll give you 60 seconds, right?
60 seconds. Well, you see the Haitian flag there, and here I go again with these gloves, these Haitian gloves. If you order them from the website, they're $25.99. And the next slide, you can see Fight Hate with gloves. I have every single different kind of glove that you could ever want. And the last slide, what are you guys laughing about? We got to make money. I do this program, Fight Hate with Gloves, and my truck right now, the transmission needs to be replaced so that I can do this program. On the 22nd, we have an event coming up, and I don't have my truck. And if you guys bought gloves, you really could help us to carry out this mission in providing conflict resolution, training, mental resolve. I do art as well. Fine Black Art's another website, and it's another practice, and it's something that I need to utilize more. We need to do more art. I don't do it enough. And I'm thankful for you guys allowing me to present. And God bless you all. And if you guys have any questions, now's the time, I think, or is the time going to be later?
Thanks, Steve. We'll get one more presentation and then we'll have a discussion. So thanks so much for that.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah. So I think what Mads and Reverend Neil, you all are up.
Awesome. We're just going to kick it off with some quick intros. So Mads, she, her, I'm with the Vermont Workers Center. We're organizing around healthcare, and I'll pass it on to Reverend Neil to get us started.
I am on mute. I'm Reverend Neil, he, him, Georgia Poor People's Campaign, Nonviolent Medicaid Army. And we have the 1811 German Coast Uprising, which followed shortly after the Haitian Revolution and victory for their freedom, which made the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase possible, doubling the size of America, which was an illegal purchase from Napoleon, who lost that war in Haiti, who was originally only planning to sell New Orleans. Many of the deposed Haitian slavers moved to Louisiana with their slaves to participate in the sugar boom in the region at the time, which relied heavily on enslaved laborers, bringing with them their slaves who would have brought with them the stories and strategies of Haitian freedom. The German coast was an area with an estimated 60% enslaved population and a large segment of free blacks in which the area, the blacks outnumbered whites by a ratio of 5-to-1. The uprising, led by what is to be believed as a Haitian-born slave named Charles Delon and two native-born slaves named Cook and Comana, who organized most of the freedom fighters, took inspiration from the Haitian freedom fighters. The largest uprising of enslaved people in US history, an estimated 125 to 500 strong at its greatest fighting force. It started on the Andre Plantation, January 8th, 1811, with just 25 individuals on the plantation. This plantation was chosen because it was a warehouse for a local militia. Oops, I'm sorry, let me go to the next slide. How about that? I'm just rumbling along, trying to make up a little time here. On January 8th, 1811, Charles organized a group, the Andre Plantation. These paintings by contemporary Louisiana artists named Lorraine Ginron showed these events. Next slide. They marched down the river at each plantation. I'm trying to see, make sure I don't. Enslaved people joined them. They burned many plantation houses along the way. The group grew to nearly 500 strong. Next slide. Attacked by US Army soldiers, ending not because they were overwhelmed, but because they ran out of ammunition on January 10th, 1811. I will pass it over to my wonderful co-creator.
Thanks, Reverend Neil. So on this slide, you can see the path they took along the 5 plantations that were burned. And I'm going to try not to get too graphic, but just in the next like 30 seconds, there's going to be some descriptions of pretty intense violence. So like Reverend Neil said, they ended not because they were stopped, but because they ran out of ammunition. The enslaved insurgents would only end up killing 2 white slavers, but the militia responded intensely and violently and ended up executing 95 of the folks participating in the uprising. On January 13th at the Destron plantation trial, 18 enslaved people were found guilty and all were later executed. Their bodies were actually placed along the roadways as kind of a warning to other folks who might consider taking part in a rebellion or an uprising. DeLond himself, their leader, would be just viciously tortured. Not going to get into detail, but they did absolutely terrible things, again, to make an example of these revolutionaries. We're going to spend the last few minutes kind of pulling the lessons out that we can get from this uprising. The first is communication. They were able to make it so far down towards New Orleans and build up so much power because they communicated and planned in advance. They didn't fly by the seat of their pants. The second lesson, they used their privilege. They saw it as another tool in their tool belt. So DeLond himself was in a privileged position as an overseer. He used that to openly plan and learn from those he was enslaved by. The third lesson, thinking strategically. So Charles was from the DeLond plantation, not the Andrew plantation where the uprising started, but he intentionally went upriver to start the uprising in order to have as many supplies as possible. It was an armory, so it was an advantageous starting point. The next point, kind of self-explanatory, rebellion will be written out of history. So it's important for us as a class to remember it, study it, carry on these lessons. And finally, the ruling class learns from us just as we learn from them. So it's important to understand that. They'll identify our tactics in order to stifle them. At this time, leading up to this uprising, enslaved people used their free time to train with freed Black folks using coded cadences in dance and song. After this rebellion, the folks who enslaved these people recognized that, learned from that, and tightened restrictions governing the activities of freed folks in Louisiana so that wouldn't happen again. And that's our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Mads and Reverend Neil. Sorry. I think we have some time for any questions or reflections folks want to raise for Dee or Mads or Reverend Neil, stuff that they shared that you want to lift up, that you appreciated, or pieces that you wanted to, that you want to bring into the mix that maybe weren't spoken to. So people could put their name in the chat, share in the chat, or just come off mute.
Hey everybody, this is Sheila. As interesting discussion, I think, about the various rebellions and kind of use of a couple of things that might be a little salient, at least it sticks out to me, is that the Haitian Revolution came on the heels of the French Revolution. And one of the things that the French Revolution did that kind of did a number of things. They offered freedom to only those folks that had some white ancestry, who were African and white. They called them the jeunes de couleur. And so those were the folks who they had one foot in one part of Haitian, prior Haitian, one part of society economically and socially, but were still very discriminated against on the other hand. And they were often slaveholders themselves. And so they had to make it's just really interesting when you read the history to see how the French and the British were able to really manipulate that division based on color and your so-called positioning in society at that time. And so when Dessalines, I'm probably pulverizing his name, came along, a lot of what he was left with was really trying to figure out how to unite this group so that they could, move forward. But when the French finally acknowledged Haiti, they left Haiti with a 100 million franc debt that I think still goes on today. It was completely isolated and cut off. I think that's a really important thing to kind of remember in terms of how the Haitian Revolution was stifled on the one hand, but on the other hand, its impact was incredible. It incited, not just incited and motivated what happened as folks were describing in the United States, but it also had an impact in the entire quote unquote slaveholding world. It was quite earth-shattering. Anyway, there's more to be said, but I'm going to shut up. So.
That's great, Sheila. Really appreciate the contribution. I think we have time for one or two more comments, reflections, questions.
I was muted and trying to talk. I think that it's amazing that she did my whole presentation in about 2 minutes with no art. That's a great woman for you. Jean-Jacques Dessalines was a great leader as well. And Toussaint L'Ouverture, he had a quote that I put on the picture that I did about the roots. You can't cut it off at the root. Or what did he say? What's the quote that I put on the picture? But it kind of reminds me of Marcus Garvey's quote. Marcus Garvey from Jamaica, he said, a people without a knowledge of their history is like a plant without, or a tree without roots, and a tree without roots is dead. So that history, us knowing where we came from and us knowing where we're going, is of utmost importance. And I appreciate everybody that was there. There it is. But at the bottom of the slide, I think I put, where is it at? By capturing me, you only defeated the trunk of the tree of freedom. You only defeated the trunk of the tree of freedom. It will grow back because its roots are plenty. The roots are vivacious. The roots are many. The roots are numerous. There's so many that can replace that. What do we call that? That multi-leadership model? We use that, but it's not just about one person. Toussaint L'Ouverture, he ended up going back to France. He was in prison. He was taken captive. His children were back in France before him. His wife went with him. He ended up dying in France. But Jean-Jacques was killed like mercilessly. And many Haitian presidents and leaders after that were assassinated mercilessly, even in the past couple of years. But
thank you so much, Dee. I'm sorry, comrade. We're gonna just try to get one more voice in there before we move to the next section. Thank you.
But thank you for jumping in and saving me earlier too.
Yeah, can we hear from one other reflection, maybe on Mads and Reverend Neil's German Coast uprising?
Yeah, I just, it was really powerfully done. I appreciate the presentation, Mads and Reverend Neil, because that, for one thing, is one of those hidden. This was major. It was a major uprising, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of us have have not heard of this, and so that's a lesson in itself. And the other point is that we're not shadow boxing, and that's what a little bit tie into Dee's thing too, right? We're not shadow boxing, and they weren't shadow boxing, and so every move came with a counter move. You know, the Stono Rebellion, the German Coast Uprising, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner. And that's part of what we need to really pay attention to, of knowing our enemy and knowing the moves and the counter moves, the punch and the counter punch. So thank you.
Awesome. So folks have other reflections, put them in the chat. And I think we'll go to the second block of presentations. We have Moses and Anu on the Seminole Wars, and then Oshara on Nat Turner. So turn it over to you all.
And we don't have a slide, it's just us. But hi everyone, my name is Moses.
Sorry, I was on mute, and I'm Anu. And I can be pinned in there. Could you pin both of us, or?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Trying.
And
today
we
are
going
to
talk
about
the
Seminole
Wars. And no, we're not going to do that for the whole presentation.
So we'll start with like a brief history, and this is not all of it, but obviously, but the Seminole Wars were made up of 3 distinct struggles that.
Oh, we can't hear
We
you,
lost
Moses.
your sound, comrade. Did it switch to another? We still can't hear you. Did it switch to another sound input?
I think.
Oh, there you are.
And you're back.
Sometimes, I'm sorry. It's my internet. So I apologize if I go out, but I don't know if I go out, you can just like pick it up for me. But so the Seminole Wars were made up of 3 distinct struggles that were between the years of 1816 and 1858, which is placed right between the War of Independence and the Civil War. The Seminoles were not like a singular tribe, but instead they were a nation that was formed out of solidarity. So many were basically migrants to present-day Florida from what is now present-day Alabama and Georgia, and they were from the Muscogee-speaking Creek people that resided there. So these folks came down to what was then Spanish-controlled Florida during colonization, and they basically opened their home to Black people that had escaped slavery, who in turn could own their own land and could pretty much live in pretty equal part in society with the Seminoles. This obviously threatened the planters, who also, in addition to that, wanted to expand chattel slavery into the state of Florida, which they couldn't do because the Seminoles were there. And so the US basically continued to violently attack and attempt to eradicate the Seminole Nation and Black Seminoles who fought alongside each other. And the way that the US tried to defeat them was through warfare. And then of course, legislation like the Indian Removal Act, which the Seminoles resisted. This history is really important for us to learn because we see the unity between the Seminoles and the Black people who had escaped slavery. And we see that there's such a history of dispossessed folks coming together across these lines of division and really fighting back. And it also, I think the Seminole Wars also highlights especially Native resistance that we're not often taught about. Like, why is it that all of us here probably know a lot about the Trail of Tears, but none of us probably know anything about the Seminole Wars?
And I love the lessons that folks are pulling out from the presentation so far, that, you know, knowing the history of revolution arms us. And, you know, what if the Seminoles had known of a lot of the other struggles against empire and had been able to build even more relationships with other groups in struggle, to strategize, to study their shared enemy, and had something like a network similar to UPOR, what more could happen? And so the U.S. elite, you know, really needed more and more land to turn into private property. Chattel slavery was the cheapest labor to work that land, and so they needed Native people off their original land to do this. And we want to actually say one something about Osceola, who was a very well-known Seminole leader who was captured during the Second Seminole War. And the US military basically fake surrendered and invited him to a fake peace summit to broker talks and then imprisoned him. And what's interesting also about this is that it prompted huge outrage also within US Congress and the press of the day and the general public, who all decried this as treachery because Osceola was seen as a patriot for his people. And a lot of folks had respect for what he was doing, even though they were, on the colonizer end of it. And after his capture, the Seminoles continued to fight for, at the very least, 20 years, some would say, that continued well after that. And so what happened is their tribe actually dwindled to 300 people, who then escaped deeper into the Everglades. And they knew the terrain so well that the US military did not. So essentially, the military just gave up going after them. They were like, nah, we can't get up in here. So they remain one of the tribal nations that never officially signed a peace treaty and never officially surrendered. And so this is a quote from Osceola. He says, "My brothers, when the Great Spirit tells me to go with the white man, I go, but he tells me not to go. The white man says I shall go, and he will send people to make me go, but I have a rifle, and I have some powder and some lead. I say we must not leave our homes and lands. If any of our people want to go west, we won't let them. And I tell them they are our enemies, and we will treat them so, for the Great Spirit will protect us." And we're done.
Yeah.
That was awesome, y'all. That was brilliant.
Thanks so much, y'all. So we'll go to Oshara, and then we'll do the discussion combined. So Oshara, if you're ready, get in there.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us all here. First, I want to say that I already said I'm glad to be here, but I'll start with Nat Turner. Nat Turner was he was a slave, and I didn't know this, he was a preacher. And wait, hold on one second, sorry. Okay. He was a preacher, and Nat Turner knew that it was time to rebel against all that was going on with the slavery. He got tired, and he led a rebellion of enslaved people. It was August of 1831, and I thought it was cool. He was born October 2nd. I was born October 9th, so maybe there's a relation there or something. I don't know. And then what his action did, he did some of the words that are used are really interesting to me, because it made it sound like he was the one on the wrong side by saying he massacred people, or he did a rebellion, or he did a revolt. But he just wanted to be free. And when he did a massacre called 200 Black people, helped him, and over the course of 4 days, this is what happened. And he was able to, I didn't put my timer on, so please stop me when I come, sorry. He was able to revolt, and had other people with him over the course of 4 days. And this was when the slaves were rebelling at the time. And he said he was called by God to deliver people. We just heard that. And then and he convinced people to join him, and they went from house to house, and his masters also. And part of the work that you all sent me was, I didn't know that they said they didn't believe some of the words he spoke were so eloquent. They didn't believe he really said those words. But you know, anything is, people can say whatever they want to say. And his rebellion led to the passage of new laws. So at that time, that legislator, they had the opportunity to free the slaves, but instead of freeing the slaves, they created these really harsh laws that just imposed more restrictions on them and made more penalties for African Americans, even free Americans. And then I do want to say that some of the results of the rebellion were the abolition of slavery in the states and laws outlawing the import of more enslaved people, and the passage of legislation allowing slavery to disappear by attrition, and a debate in the legislature about whether to abolish slavery. So it's like that rebellion did so many things, but eventually he got away, other people got killed, and you know, he got caught. But I think for me, part of the whole thing that I got too was the audacity of the people being so upset with him, as opposed to being upset with slavery and being upset with this whole thing going on. And so yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. And yeah, that's what I would say. And we have that. I know we're not supposed to like say what's going on today, but we got that happening today now.
It's good to bring in today, Oshara.
Yes. And the legislators, and I want y'all to know how inspired I was today. So I had to go to my happy place and make these earrings and say, you can't expel hope, which is what Representative Justice said today. So I believe that's the same thing that even in his time, you know, we don't go around doing all that today, but in his time, that's what was coming out. And I just had to embody that and embrace that and really hold on to that, because it's all these movements taking place. So
I noticed those earrings. They're beautiful.
thank you.
So we have some time for people to chime in the chat or come off mute and share either appreciations for some of the teaching or other lessons that you want to call into the space from these two different experiences that folks were just reporting on. So Becca, yeah.
I just want to really express my appreciation for how much time and energy y'all have spent putting this together. It's been really awesome. One of the people in my group had brought into the space the Occupy movement. And I think that it's really interesting to place that when we're going through this particular stage of building the revolution. And it's one of the things that makes me extra grateful for this space and y'all, because one of the reasons those kinds of things don't last is because there's not somebody strategizing and planning and really digging into these lessons from the past and figuring out how to pull us together for the long term. This isn't just a one and done. We're not going to show up and it's going to be over tomorrow. We have to have that long-term plan. And I think all these are really important moments in history to remember, but also to remember that they come together as a whole story that's not just pieces in the tapestry.
Man.
Thanks so much, Becca. It's awesome. I guess what we got, Natalia or Jay.
It was me. I wanted to thank those amazing presenters about the Seminole Wars. I just want to emphasize what Moses said about the strategic way that they want to erase history. I mean, Sierra, my fellow South Floridian, I lived in South Florida for a little bit, and I recognize words like Oshara or Seminole, but it's because it's highway and mall names, and there is no telling of the general population what that's about, or inviting us to learn and understand what that means for our history. And for Oshara and Nat Turner, I listened to the podcast that talked about all the different uprisings. So I'm not sure if this was specific to Nat Turner's, but it was said how poor whites along the way would help. In some instances, the folks both escaping and revolting, because they understood to some degree the importance of it, right? Even if there was those divisions that wanted to be sown upon folks. And also how some slaves either didn't join or ratted them out of probably personal survival, right? They knew what the punishment would be if they got caught. And so it just makes me think about the sacrifice and the thought that we have to put about when we fight for freedom, when we fight for something bigger than us, what does it mean to take a step and keep the line and stay on course in front of so many repression, so much regression too, and repression.
Thanks so much, Natalia. Charito.
In relation to the Haitian Revolution, I want to mention that the Declaration of Independence that they wrote is amazing. It mentioned by name the equality of women, little girls, and nature expressly. So they were ahead of the French Revolution. I mean, well beyond better. And also the American Revolution, of course, that was just a fiasco, nice words and empty practices. Thank you.
Thanks, Charito.
Thanks, Rito. One part of the picture that I didn't mention is an eagle flying on the far right of the picture, just to show the US's just hidden hand or flying over. But yeah, that Declaration of Independence. One thing about Toussaint Louverture, though, that he wrote was he wrote that he would be governor for life, and that wasn't a democratic thing. And that's something that we got to think about too. Leaders always have like a balance. They always have like, nobody was perfect. The only perfect man that ever walked the planet was Jesus, right? So we just thank God for these presentations. I thank God for being here. And I thank God for you, Sharito, because you're the one that told me about this. You're the one that told me to be a part of this University of the Poor. So thank you, Sharito.
Thanks, Dee. We could take one more comment, and then if not, we can pass it over to Karen, who's going to close us out with the presentations tonight.
I do want to say one thing in response to what he said about being president for life. In modern day, just, Mike Pompeo, of course, was our Secretary of State. Here, I heard him on the news. He said that he wants legislation to last 250 years. And that was said, I heard him say that in 2022. So I just want to bring that up. So what you said about men and everything like that.
Thanks, Oshara. Cool. Let's hand it over to you, Karen, to close us out, and then we'll get to our discussion groups.
All right. So the first thing is, I am just so grateful to the presenters and kind of wowed by the insights and the lessons that y'all drew out of these rebellions, revolts, revolutions. You can't help but notice a distinct difference between the success of the Haitian Revolution and the defeats of so many slave revolts. Abolitionists in their writings and lectures on the Haitian Revolution said that it was the only successful slave uprising in history, and it was ushering in an age of emancipation. They looked at the Haitian Revolution to see what was needed for slave revolts in the US to become successful. Haiti had brilliant, determined leaders, they said, but they were also brilliant, determined leaders planning slave rebellions here in the US. Haiti had maroon communities and runaways who played their roles. There were maroon communities and runaways here playing their own important roles. But as W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, The system of slavery demanded a special police force, and such a force was made possible and unusually effective by the presence of the poor whites. This explains the difference, he wrote, between the slave revolts in the West Indies and the lack of effective revolt in the southern United States. In the West Indies, the power over the slave was held by the whites and carried out by them and such Negroes as they could trust. In the South, on the other hand, the great planters formed proportionately quite as small a class, but they had singularly enough at their command some 5 million poor whites. That is, there were actually more white people to police the slaves than there were slaves. And we learned last week that that was a tactic, an intentional tactic on the part of the ruling class, not only to police enslaved workers, but also to divide the class. Haiti, according to some abolitionists, fought a war that was both anti-slavery and anti-colonialist. They freed themselves from the yoke of slavery, but still bore the yoke of colonialism, even as they inspired a wave of revolts, not only here in the US, but across the hemisphere. And what happened to the South after the revolts? We heard pieces of it already in the presentations. Put it all together, all those revolts, the South became a fully militarized police camp in response, with a continuation of brutal ruling class responses that began after Bacon's Rebellion. So a lot of forms of resistance were no longer viable. The Underground Railroad activity becomes the dominant force of resistance. Shifting of objective conditions leading to shifting tactics. We're going to develop, can't talk straight today. We're going to delve into the ways in which conditions change and tactics change in response over the rest of the course as we look at stages in the movement to end slavery. And I am going to pass this over to whoever is closing us out with words for next time. No, I'm passing this over, sorry, to discussion groups.
All right, y'all, you will have 9 minutes in your discussion group. And there is the document Phil just put in to take notes, reflection questions as well. Enjoy your stay. All right, y'all, well, welcome back. We wanted to hear just from a few folks that haven't spoken yet tonight, if you want to share what came up in your discussion groups, what spoke to you, what moved you, what questions or themes would you like to take up? Yeah. What's coming up for y'all?
One thing that we talked about would be interesting to dig into more was in the Frederick Douglass reading this time, he kind of alluded to the tension with Garrison and the Garrisonians, and like he didn't elaborate a lot on that, but yeah, it just got me thinking about like sort of the folks, at least in our organizing circles, who maybe share some common goals, but there's other stuff in the way, and yeah, sort of figure out how to navigate, how to move forward together, and also how to not get co-opted or not get softened. I think it would just be an interesting thing to dig into.
Wow, yeah, definitely. Kelly?
Yeah, we had a really great discussion in our group, and a couple of things that came up were again, just diving in more deeper on what lessons do we take from these rebellions, and really going a little deeper into applying them to our organizing now. The idea of the poor whites, and that we still have that class that we're trying to organize. And then I really appreciated that Natalia shared in our group that potentially having our discussion group look go even deeper on what was happening in even more places around the world, to kind of see, like, you know, what else was going on, and then how were people sharing information. And, you know, we know folks were being encouraged to read and to try to pass things on and to read to other people, but like, what were the other methodologies of sort of getting the information from place to place? And I hope I did that justice, Natalia.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. There's this book, I don't know why I'm like blanking on the name of it, but it talks about the communication between enslaved folks from Venezuela all the way up through Canada. Gosh, I can't remember why. When I think of it, I'll share it out, but it's really good. It talks about that sort of relationship and communication. Reverend Tani, I saw you got off mute. Were you going to say something?
I'm having problems with my computer.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I hear you. So if you have anything you want to say, you can throw it in there. If not, I guess I'll kick it to you, John, to talk about our class next week. Common Wind. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So thanks, Sierra, and thanks to everyone. We will be getting the assignment out to y'all for class number, 4, going on to class number 4. We've entitled it Knowing Your Enemy, The Rise of King Cotton, the Slave Power and Capitalism. And I want folks to get into these readings and do your best with them. We'll give you audio as well as the text to go along with them. Some stuff from Power in America by John Keller. This really excellent piece that features Sven Becker and the Empire of Cotton book that he wrote. You know, part of, like, you know, thinking about what we covered today and the period that the most of these uprisings and rebellions cover, that span the colonial period into the sort of very early few decades in the beginning of the founding of the United States. We're really going to pick this up where into this sort of early stage, and really where, you know, King Cotton becomes King Cotton, right? Like, this is some of this stuff, like from the cotton gin and the technological impact of the cotton gin, to the politics and the way the land, labor, and capital just changes in those decades. And so, you know, this is a story that moves as you play. Like, it does not, you know, it changes, and some really major shifts happen here in this period. And so I want folks to get into that, to really be thinking about the development of the economic, social, and political system in the South, in contradiction to the economic, social, and political system of the North, and the social forces at play. So anyway, looking forward to seeing y'all next week as we get into the political economy. So, all right. Is there anything else to be said?
Oh, Sheila, just go ahead and get in there if you feel comfortable.
I don't have anything. I just posted something. It's just an aside. That's all. If folks are interested, it's not necessarily pertaining, but it's really looking at what starts happening after the overthrow of Black Reconstruction and how workers are continuing to organize. But the role of actual political thought, political leaders who are organized to an extent. Anyway, kind of ahead of the discussion, but it just occurred to me.
Thank you. Well, I always welcome your insights. I think we all do. So
thank you. Yeah.
All right, good people. Well, as Phil put in the chat, we welcome discussion group facilitators to just hang out for a bit after class tonight. And for everyone else, you ain't got to go home, but we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to
Thanks,
presenters.
everybody.
Uh,
So
Thanks,
long,
everyone.
y'all.
Peace.